All right, am I on? Okay. So good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's really nice to see everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys this morning a little bit about what I'm really passionate about, which is the nutrition side. Now, before we get started, I just want to make one disclosure. Sooner or later, I'm going to fall off the stage. Because I walk around, and I'm so scared now that I just walk here, I'm like, oh my God, that's a long way down. So if anybody has CPR or anything like that, just please save me. Do not dialyze me, okay? But save me. All right, so with that disclosure, let me get started. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to go through and talk about the evidence-based side of nutrition. We have started this journey now, gosh, it's been probably around 15, 16 months that I've been giving this talk now. So this really got started back in 2015, was the very first version of this talk that we gave. And since that time, we've actually refined the talk. We have done a lot more data analysis. We constantly look at the evidence behind it. So what are some things you should know about before we start delving into this? First, one of the hardest things about looking at nutrition is that we all come with biases. We all have very strong personal beliefs, cultural beliefs, social beliefs that go into our version of what an ideal diet should be. So if there's something that you want to take away from this talk is our whole emphasis in CHL is really to move away from the word diet. Because diet, if you think about it, the first part of diet is die with a T. We're going to change that to lifestyle. And in order to start that journey, it's not so easy as just putting the word lifestyle on a piece of paper. It doesn't change that. Lifestyle has to be lived. But in order to get to that place from talking about diets to lifestyle, we have to make this transition. So first thing you should know about nutrition is this. There's a lot of controversy in nutrition. Why is there controversy? Why is it not the same as when we look at trials in oncology or trials in cardiology? But in nutrition, it seems like every single person nowadays has a guru. They belong to a camp. And I can list several camps on the internet that are really big right now, and people are avid believers where their guru can literally say nothing wrong. Well, I am not a guru, I am not an expert, so I want to shift that focus away from it. I want to be the guy who wants to be evidence-based and take away my own personal biases as much as possible. So what this talk really is going to do is talk about why it's so hard. And the reason it's so hard is it's really, really difficult to do a randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blinded trial in nutrition. As obvious as that sounds, because we can't do those kind of studies, we rely on the next best thing. We have a lot of population-based studies. The weakest population-based study is we take a bunch of people and we look at them retrospectively, which means we say, what happened to them in the last 20 years, and we come up with conclusions. A stronger study is we take a large population and we look at them prospectively. We take that same group and now we start today and we follow them out for years or decades. So how do we come up with the biases? One of the biggest bias has to do with recall bias. What's recall bias is anytime you are dealt with a study where it talks about nutrition and I ask you, what did you have for lunch yesterday? Well, it's fascinating that if you walk into your doctor's office, most patients in general, not intentionally, unintentionally, they underestimate what they eat by 30%. And they overestimate how much they exercise by 30%. So it's a fascinating concept that when you're relying on population studies, it's very easy to have biases of recall. So you can say you did all this great thing because you're trying to please the researcher. So how do we overcome that? We start to look at not one study, but several studies. We start to look at not years, but decades. So population sample becomes in the millions instead of 3,000 or 4,000. So that's how we come up with data. And we want to see it reproduced because one of the things we get so alarmed with is now the latest sort of fad is for everybody to quote a study. Well, this study showed, I remember reading a study that showed this. And I must have given this talk now 30, 40 times, and every time I give it, I always come across some of these things where there's always a study I get thrown at. They say, but I read this study. And so what we did for this talk was I reviewed over 600 studies and started initially spending 6 months going through all this data to now select the studies that were most encompassing. And then over the last year and a half or so, that's been updated. So this is a constantly updated process that changes. And what you're seeing today is the latest version of the talk as it exists now. If you guys, are you guys getting CME? No? Okay, so we can skip the disclosures. I don't have any. So my favorite quote, "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food," is such an amazing quote. I'm sure you have heard of this quote. Anybody not heard of this quote? Yeah, I thought so. Everybody's heard of this quote, but let me tell you why I put it in here for you guys. Is to caution you, is to warn you, is to tell you, be very careful about this quote, because this quote is being taken out of context. What we have done now is we have started to say some things that are very, very scary. Some things like, you don't need chemo because you can cure cancer just by eating the right food. You don't need a beta blocker, you don't need aspirin for colorectal cancer prevention, you don't need statins, you don't need to see a regular doctor because they don't really understand any of this, but instead eat this diet. So it's incredibly important for us to understand that diet is the foundation of a good, healthy, balanced lifestyle. But there isn't anything miraculous that we're going to present to you today that's going to say changing one nutrient or one ingredient is all of a sudden going to cure things. When I see people, even in our organization, saying things like, if you're a type 1 diabetic and you can forget about insulin because I have a cure for you through diet, I'm scared. When I see some of our own instructors saying, you know what, you got cancer because you didn't eat X, Y, and Z, I think that's a problem. So we have to reframe how we present this message and how we talk about it. We have to understand that this is foundation, but there's nothing out there that is the single ingredient that explains every single thing in life. Nothing. So with that, let's start the journey. So we're going to talk about what is our evidence-based message. Is there one particular diet that we are favoring? And if so, what is that diet? And how are we going to look into it is we're going to divide it up. We're going to look at some of the food groups. We're going to look at certain other basic things like fats and fibers. And then the most exciting part is we're going to do some dietary information for you guys. Now, after we get done with this, I'm going to try to speed through the slides so that I create plenty of time for you guys to ask your questions. Most of the time what I've found is every time I've given this talk, we never have enough time to have those questions answered. There's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of conflicts, so I want to make sure that I address those for you guys. So let's get started. So let's start off with the very first and most popular thing out there right now, which is whole grains. And the reason this is such a big deal is because right now there's a lot of stuff. There's even physicians who are writing books such as the Wheat Belly who are saying if you eat grains and the grain brain, it's going to be harmful for you. So in our research, looking at tons of studies, there was a recurring pattern, and the recurring pattern was very simple. The higher the intake of whole grains, the better off you are in terms of all-cause mortality, stroke risk, and in terms of cardiovascular mortality. How much? Highest intake in this particular meta-analysis of 18 studies, almost 500,000 people, 21% decreased risk. But when we talk about our way of living and lifestyle, what we focus on is not so much that you have to go from 0 to 100%. We want people to understand that we will meet the patient where they're at. What does that mean about meeting the person? Is if you are willing to make a small change, how about a single serving? Ms. Jones, Mr. Smith, how about a single serving? What is the impact of a single serving of increase in whole grains? 5% reduction in total mortality, 9% reduction in cardiovascular mortality. Whole grains actually works. There's a very interesting study that's coming in the next version of this talk. I just haven't finished updating the slides yet. But basically what it talks about is the impact of whole grains on your resting metabolic rate. Fascinating study, because what they showed was that compared to white bread, whole wheat bread, and whole grains in general actually increase, not decrease, increase your resting metabolic rate, which means what? You're actually able to expend more energies, including at rest. So fascinating what an impact whole grains does. The gluten craze that exists right now is the same concept. The number of actual people who have true celiac disease is not changing, Yet, gluten-free diets is a billion-dollar industry right now. There are more gluten-free foods than anything. So the problem that you run into when you start to talk about gluten-free foods is there's a lot of issues when it comes to these dogmas. So gluten-free diets, do they work? Is it because when a person selectively chooses to say, I'm going on a diet, do they make a lot of decisions to be healthy? And is it because if you look at somebody who does these diets within the first 6 months, it's very different than if they go more than 6 months. Stay tuned, because when we get to the diet section, we're going to look at a lot of this stuff, and we're going to talk about it. But what about fruits and vegetables? This is important because we think that there ought to be a completely different diet for diabetics. I'm here to tell you that the data shows the answer is no. The same diet, the same lifestyle habits that we recommend are the same thing that applies to all of the disease states, and the reason is simple. The reason is the data is very interesting. If you have somebody who eats fresh fruits daily versus rarely or never, you actually see that their blood glucose does what? It actually drops. Eating fresh fruits and vegetables daily, significantly fresh fruits daily, you actually have a drop in your sugars. Fascinating. Fascinating. So this becomes incredibly important because what do we tell patients who are diabetic? Don't eat fruits. That's a very interesting statement. But what is really important is to understand, what do we tell our kids? Oh, go ahead and have the juice. Juice, I don't care what kind, orange juice, apple juice, cranberry, I don't care what kind of juice it is. Juice is terrible for you. Fruits, the whole entire fruit, is excellent for you. And the juicing craze, where people go on all these cleanses that destroy all the healthy bacteria in their gut, thinking they have some crazy amount of stool stuck in there, right? The answer is absolutely ludicrous. We have very good data to show how you can develop a really healthy gut by changing your diet and including things like fresh fruits and vegetables in there. What about stroke? Same exact thing. If you're getting more than 5 servings of whole fruits and vegetables per day versus less than 3, you got 26% reduced risk of stroke. But what if you can't do 5 servings? Even if you get 3 to 5 servings, you got an improvement of 11%. But what if you can't even do 3 to 5 servings? What if your patient says, Doc, I will give you 1 serving? Great. 1 serving reduces your risk of dying from anything by 5%. Wow. We talked about whole grains. 1 serving makes an impact. We're talking about fresh fruits and vegetables. 1 serving makes an impact. This is about meeting the patient where they're at, not forcing them to say, if you don't go 100%, somehow you're a bad person. Protein is incredibly important because this becomes really, really important. There's a lot of different diets out there. If you think about sort of the diets that fall into the ketogenic category, such as Atkins, which emphasizes high doses of proteins, or even if you were to say, let's look at the keto diet, which focuses on high amounts of fat, but protein is a really interesting part because this is something that's near and dear to most of our hearts. So let me tell you the one thing that I can say with certainty here. Red meat and processed meat, unfortunately, is really bad for you. Now, for those of you guys who eat it, like I do, it is incredibly tasty. But the problem is there is no doubt about it. When we look at the data, the highest red meat consumption, 31% increased risk of dying for men, 36% for women, processed meat, 16% and 25% respectively. But here's the thing, does that mean that you could never touch red meat? Because this is where the argument is. The argument is there's a group of people who say, look, you have to be all the way over here to not be at risk of dying. Well, here's the problem with that argument. Anybody heard of the blue zones?
Yes.
So the blue zones, for those of you guys who haven't, are areas in the world where they have the largest population living over 100 that are considered to be healthy. These are places like the most famous one is Okinawa, Japan. National Geographic had this whole thing about that, right? In Southern California, we have a place called Loma Linda, right, where they have the Seventh-day Adventists, right? The Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica is another place where you look at, there's all these places. Icaria, Greece is another one that we look at. Sardinia, Italy is another place that we look at. What's really interesting about these places is that the majority of their diet actually is composed of what? Whole foods, right? Lots and lots of vegetables, lots of lentils, lots of legumes. But interestingly enough, they're not vegan, they're not vegetarian. They actually do eat meat, but they look at meat as a celebration. It's not every week, A couple of times a month is when they have it. They don't have it 3 times a day. They're not getting 10 cheeseburgers every single day like some of us are. So when you have patients who say, Doc, I am not going to go from 10 cheeseburgers to 0 cheeseburgers, that's okay. You don't have to. But where can we meet? What are you willing to start with? Because when we start to talk about things like red meat and everything, even in terms of cancer, what we notice here is that every additional serving of red meat has an impact on total mortality, cardiovascular mortality, and cancer mortality. So if a person is willing to meet you and say, okay, I get what you're saying, I'm willing to meet you, I'm willing to cut it down by a serving. Fabulous. That is a great starting point. Remember, it's not 0 to 100. Because if that was the case, then these places across the world that have these largest living populations would not exist. Instead, it would be strictly the people who are vegans. But here's the fascinating part about this. When you look at the blue zones aren't the blue zones because they just eat well. Eating is not the end-all be-all. It is one component of a total lifestyle, which is what I call the self principle. And the self principle is very interesting because it stands for sleep, exercise, love, and food. These guys on average get about 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. They don't do what we do, which is we're so proud of the fact that we only sleep for 3 hours and we can work like crazy. Right? And when we take a vacation, we're looking at our smartphones because we are so effective at returning messages, right? And I probably have, like, in this talk alone, I'll probably have 10 or 15 emails that I get just because it's an hour. That's not what these guys do. For exercise, they don't do what we do. They don't have a 24-hour fitness or some kind of a health club that they go for an hour a day. On average, they walk 5 to 10 miles per day of low-intensity walking. They just move. They don't sit down like everybody in this room is, right? Their whole pattern is low-intensity movements they do all day. And the love component isn't some mushy stuff. The love component is very simple. If you look at Okinawa, Japan, for example, what they have is, they have, as children, they have 3 or 4 people that they kind of get to know really, really well, and they grow old with each other. They spend time on relationships. They practice gratitude. When you look at religions, I'm not religious, and this is not a religion talk, but people who actually end up going to church or meditate and do any of those things actually find that they live longer. It's not because of their religion, because it's any religion that does that. It's the idea of being able to de-stress. It's the idea of being able to be present in the moment. And at work, one of the things that we do is, we're even reluctant to say hi to a stranger. How often is it that when you go to work, you say thank you to somebody? You should say it more often. Because saying thank you not only makes them feel better, it actually makes you feel better. You want to live longer? Practice gratitude. It's as simple as that. So food by itself isn't the end all. And therefore, anything that goes to the extreme, we become exclusionary and no longer inclusionary. We have to be inclusive. We have to welcome people. We have to understand that if people come with different beliefs, we will meet them where they're at, instead of trying to force our beliefs, which they may or may not agree with. Fish is important because we argue about this. There's so much debate about the mercury content in fish, about fresh versus farmed fish, about fish, what type of fish, what about shrimp, because if I eat shrimp, will I die? No, you won't die. But the simple fact is this: fish actually is good for you. We know, study after study, when we look at it, now this is a really large meta-analysis of almost another 500,000 people, but when we looked at study after study, we found a recurrent theme. Increased consumption of fish was associated with a drop in acute coronary syndrome. That's including studies that were done in the last decade, which means even though the mercury contents in our waters have increased and the fish has increased, people are still having an impact from eating more fish. But nowhere in this talk have I mentioned fish oil. Fish oil is a billion-dollar industry. It's unregulated and it's still a billion-dollar industry. And you know, for primary prevention, just recently American College of Cardiology came out and said what? It does not work. Very interestingly, they say for secondary prevention, well, if you use it, it's not that big of a deal. But for primary prevention, in other words, if you're taking fish oil because you're hoping to prevent a heart attack, it does not work. Fascinating. Plant-based proteins in chronic kidney disease. Why does this matter? Because one, I'm a nephrologist, but the other reason is because kidney disease is one of those diseases where we have done the same thing we did with diabetes. We said that kidney patients need their own specific diet. This is wrong. They don't need their own specific diet. What's very fascinating about our recommendation to kidney patients is we tell them you can't have so many vegetables, you can't have so many fruits because of the risk of potassium and because of the risk of phosphorus. But the data is very clear. The data says you have this fascinating, miraculous ability to do something known as a blood test. So you should individualize your recommendation. If somebody's potassium is going up, you can look at what they're eating too much, and then we can tailor it. But to give a blanket statement that you need to cut out all vegetables and fruits because your potassium is going to go up, that is not helping your patients. And to tell our patients who are on dialysis, who have a mortality of 20% every single year, 1 in 5 dialysis patients dies every single year. That is an incredibly high number. And they don't die of dialysis. Do you know what they die of? Heart. Heart is the number 1 cause, number 2 is infection. Number 1 is heart attacks. And one of the best advice we give our dialysis patients is we say, look, you need to get your albumin up no matter what. So I don't really care where you get the protein from, just do it. So here's an interesting study. This is nice because what this was looking at was people with kidney disease, which is a GFR less than 60, and people who do not have kidney disease, which is a GFR greater than 60. And what did we find? 12% drop in mortality in normal people, 23% drop in mortality with kidney disease if you started to change some of that animal protein to a little bit of plant protein. What is that? Tofu, right? Lentils are a good source, right? So if you used a little bit of plant protein, now remember, nowhere in this talk did I say 100% plant protein or 100% animal protein. This is about small shifts that actually make a difference. What about dairy? Very interesting that with dairy, there's a lot of data out there that is actually sponsored by the dairy industry. And so it becomes really challenging to find studies that are actually not biased by the dairy industry. So we spent a lot of time looking at data to make sure that the stuff that we were looking at was unbiased. And what did we find? We found that in general, what the data supports is that increased dairy intake is associated with a lower risk of dying. 12% decrease as far as cardiovascular mortality goes, 13% decrease as far as stroke risk goes. The REC trial, which is a very interesting study in kidney disease patients, was really interesting, and this just came out last year, 2016, and what it showed was that those people who had the highest intake of low-fat dairy had a 16% reduction in the risk of getting newly diagnosed chronic kidney disease. So the incidence of chronic kidney disease was reduced in patients who are actually taking low-fat dairy. The reason dairy is so controversial is because with the way that agricultural stuff works and USDA works, we have given farmers and these different areas a lot of incentives to be able to have cattle. So beef is a really big industry. And we have subsidized the beef industry and we have subsidized the dairy industry. So once they got all this milk that people just couldn't drink enough milk of, what did they do? They started turning to making cheese, and now they put cheese in everything. So part of this is you take something that's true and pure, and if it's done to a low and moderation is okay, but we change it. And what did they do? Not just to cheese, but to foods that have lots of cheese and fats in them. They have figured out exactly what it takes to reach what is known as the bliss point. Do you know what the bliss point is? The bliss point is very fascinating. Bliss point is the degree at which you get maximal pleasure. So when you take a bag of Doritos and you take one of those chips, why does it taste so darn good? Because they have these food scientists that know you can change the shape of sugar, you can change the formulation of sugar so that it dissolves right away. Salt is the same concept and fat is the same concept. So when it hits your tongue, it releases and you feel really, really good. When you have hunger cravings and you say, gosh, I started eating better, but I'm hungry. The question really is, are you physiologically hungry? Or is this the part of your brain that is addicted saying you're hungry? And most of the time, it's actually the part of your brain. Because true hunger, it doesn't even start till about 24 hours. So if you're getting water intake, you're not actually going to have any damage to your body at all if you went for a 24-hour thing. But the fascinating part about this is we are so addicted to sugar that all of a sudden it seems good. So fat is very interesting because everybody says out there that basically we were so wrong. We meaning everybody who's in the healthcare profession, everybody who studies nutrition, was wrong about the low-fat diet craze. You know, when the American Heart Association, everybody came out and said, you need to go on a low-fat diet and that would be optimal. They said that was such a joke because people did not lose weight, because people actually gained weight because diabetes and heart disease increased. So my answer to that is, yes, diabetes increased, yes, heart disease increased, but my question for you is, did we ever do a low-fat thing? The answer is no. In fact, the fat amount in food actually increased. So there's two ways that you can manipulate fat in a food. So how do you make something low-fat? If you want to make something low-fat, you have two answers, very simply. Add something else, and what is that something else? Sugar. So you add more sugar to it. You still have the same amount of fat, you add more sugar, you change the volume. Look at the serving size of products, it's all changed. And then fancy accounting, right? So when I had this old accountant who's probably going to go to jail now, and I'll probably get audited because of his thing. It's really crazy. I'm so type A, I would give him all these detailed numbers, right? So he would just make up his numbers. And I'm like, why do you do that? He's like, oh yeah, the next day your taxes are done. What do you mean my taxes are done? And I would look at the numbers and they would make no sense. So when I went to this new lawyer, or the accountant, and he was like, what did your last accountant do? He just made up all these numbers. I said, this makes no sense. Even my salary that I make at Kaiser is wrong. So he's out of his job now. He's got all these issues. But fancy accounting. So when we look at some of the products on the market, it's so funny. I had this debate with my wife one time. So she was like, oh, you know, I'm getting all healthy food. So she had Costco Kirkland brand canola oil cooking spray. And she's like, look, it's 0% fat. It's oil. How is oil 0% fat? I'm like, what? This makes no sense. How is oil? And you know, at Trader Joe's, they had one that said naturally fat-free on the can. So it's oil. It's 100% fat. And you know how they do it? It's so simple. Anybody want to take a guess? Exactly. Serving size, right? So if something is less than 0.5 grams, they can basically just say that essentially the nutritional content of it is a big fat 0. So the serving size of a Costco Kirkland brand cooking spray is 1/3 of 1 second. That's a little bit too much. That's too much. But if it's right and not right, if it's just the first one, then guess what? You're supposed to get 0, but you know you're not getting 0. And when was the last time you actually did right? So this becomes really, really exactly. It's the other way around. Right? And then you turn it over because you want to be balanced and you're type A like me. Like, let's turn it over. So you're getting a lot of fat. So what is the data on fat? All of the debate about saturated fat is the one thing that we have lots and lots and lots of data on, and I know Ansel Keys gets blamed a lot because his work is flawed, but we have so many studies that show the same exact thing, which is saturated fat is bad for you. If you decrease your saturated fat, you actually decrease your cardiovascular events. Study after study shows it. But more importantly, what I wanted to show you about this study, which was 2015, this is a randomized controlled trial, 15 of them. What we found was that if you took that saturated fat and you substituted it for protein, there was no difference. If you substituted the fat, saturated fat, for carbohydrates, there was no difference. But if you took saturated fat and substituted it for polyunsaturated or PUFAs, you actually saw an improvement. So polys are great for you. And what do we know about polyunsaturated fats? Very simply, every 5% increase has a 10% reduction in cardiovascular disease. But what about monos or MUFAs? Well, monos is very interesting because unlike what they tell you at the store, they don't actually do much as far as cardiovascular mortality goes. We could not find the evidence. This is not to say that there aren't small studies that talk about it. Once again, we are looking for, if you come up with a study, I need to replicate the study and get the same exact results. If I can't replicate your study, and it's just your study, then I should be worried. So in MUFAs, we don't. And the reason this is important is because when we talk about things like olive oil and the Mediterranean diet, the Mediterranean diet isn't so fantastic because it's the olive oil. The Mediterranean diet is so fantastic because of everything it includes, and I'll tell you more about it in the diet section. What about fiber? Fiber is interesting because when we talk about things that can really give you a lot of return on investment, fiber is one. How much fiber does a typical American get? Yeah, I heard 10 grams. That's exactly right. On average, very, very low, about 10 grams. How much fiber should you be getting? Yeah, so like 35 to 40 grams. So fascinating that for every 10 gram increase in your diet, you actually have a reduction in all-cause mortality by 11%. Just that, just 10 grams of fiber. Not Metamucil, not Benefiber, but actual getting it from fruits, vegetables, and cereals. So, what do we know about the data? The data here is a very busy slide, but I want you to take home one simple fact. The fact is, when we looked at the data, what we found was there wasn't a difference in terms of mortality-wise between soluble versus insoluble fiber. And why is that important? Because all of a sudden there's so many products popping out on the market that say, you know what, you can take this fiber supplement that's going to dissolve for you, and it has insoluble fiber in it. And they say, okay, you know what, it's also good for your heart. But these statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. But when we look at the data, one, supplements, we can't find any data to say the supplements are going to do anything for you. And two, we don't even know if that statement is correct. But that also means if FDA had enough money and resources, then they would evaluate each product, like what the European Union does, which is they're asking supplement people to ensure the product is safe before you sell it, versus in America, we sell it first. If it kills a bunch of people, then we have to be responsible and take it off the market. It's very interesting when it comes to the supplement industry's standards. Fiber and cancer, really important because you know there's a nice improvement as far as colorectal cancer, liver cancer, even breast cancer. But once again, nothing in this talk is 100%. So there isn't an improvement in stomach, biliary, endometrium, prostate, kidney, or even bladder. Now for the fun stuff. Fun stuff is diets. Everybody talks about diets and says, look, I know that I heard X, Y, and Z person on the internet who has 2 million Twitter followers, and therefore he is a guru or she is a guru, and I have to listen to him or her. So, Atkins diets. Very interesting when you look at high protein, low carb diets. Do they work? Everybody wants to know, do they work? Yes. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. But here's the key statement. When you look at studies, you've got to make sure that you look at any study, it has to be longer than, what is the magical number? 6 months. Just remember this number. If you ever do a study and you want to make sure that study is going to be okay, you got to make sure it's going to be longer than 6 months. So, what does that mean for us? When we have studies shorter than 6 months, Atkins works great. People lose weight, there's improvements in markers such as waist circumference, hemoglobin A1Cs, triglycerides, LDL, etc. But when you look at data greater than 6 months, out to a year or more, there's actually no difference. In fact, the dropout rates are greater than 60%. And the problem with repeat die with a T or dieting is, if you keep repeating dieting, you really mess up your resting metabolic rate. And if you mess up your resting metabolic rate, every time you have these failures, and remember, who are getting these failures are the people who have gone through very tough lives. There's a huge mental component to this that we haven't quite gotten around to figuring out how best to address it. It's not that we don't want to. We're looking at data, we're trying to figure out. But this is a really tough challenge. People are just coming to you because they want to just hear you say, well, stop eating that. Shame on you. You don't think a person who's overweight already understands they're overweight? You don't think that they have been shamed in their life by their loved ones, by their primary care doctors, by their specialists, by everyone when they walk on the street, and now they're coming to you only to be told the one thing they already know? They already know that. But what's really important is if we give them advice that is a quick fix, and then they go right back to where they are, you hurt their future. Every loss, it's in Vegas. Vegas, everybody knows that when you lose $1, it feels 10 times as bad as if you win $1. Casinos count on this. So what that makes a difference. Secondary prevention was the Leon Heart study, was very important because what we were looking at is what happens if you've already had a heart attack. Should we be prescribing a different diet for people who had a heart attack? The answer is absolutely not. When compared to the American Heart Association Step 1 diet, 14 events in the Mediterranean diet arm, 44 in the Western diet arm. For secondary events like angina, heart failure, blood clots, 27 events in the Mediterranean diet, 90 in the Western diet. So, this is a lot of data, I get it. I've confused the heck out of you. You're probably now madder than ever at me. Who is this guy standing up here? I disagree with that first slide, or I disagree with that second slide. What I want you to understand, and what I want you to take away is very, very simple. And the simplicity of it is this. We argue so much about the points that a patient will never actually do. But the most important things, which are really only 20% of the conversation, but give you 80% of the results, is what we all in this room ought to focus on. If you say, is there a perfect diet? I say the answer is no. If you say, I belong to diet A, and you belong to diet B, and I will never listen to you because my guru said diet A is the best, my answer to that is, you have to step out of your shell. We are educators, but we are in the health field, and we have to be scientifically based. We need to figure out how do we step away from our own biases, and how do we get to this point of being able to focus only on the evidence. When I put this talk together, there was a number of things that I was like, oh my God, I totally disagree. I disagree, and then I would look up more studies. Oh my God, I disagree, and I look up more studies. And I came up to this conclusion, and I said, wow. On today's Friday, so Wednesday I gave this talk, and there was a question asked of me. The question was, for sugars versus artificial sweeteners, is there any data? And I said, well, the data that I have so far is that basically when you look at artificial sweeteners in mice studies and animal studies, you basically end up gaining more weight if you take artificial sweeteners. So we know that when we give chow and we give them artificial sweeteners in water with it, they actually finish more of their meals. Just this morning, in the Journal of Neurology, there's a fascinating study. And the study looked at stroke and dementia in sugar versus artificial sweeteners. And the hazard ratio, I haven't read the study, I was trying to drive and not be a bad driver. So I just saw it and I got so excited I had to pull over. And I quickly ran through it and then I just kept on driving. I showed Sophie the study. So I haven't fully read it. I don't know how weak of a study it is, but it is a prospective study. It was followed for 10 years. They followed patients who were younger and they followed patients who were older than 65. And the hazard ratio is about 2.7 something for people who are consuming the highest consumption, meaning 3 times a week or more, of artificial sweeteners. I need to remember all the details, so I can't quote you the details, but it literally just came out today. Of course, if it's a quality study, then I'll include it in the next version of the talk. If it's not a quality study, I will not. But it's fascinating to know that when we talk about this stuff, there isn't a shortcut for saying, well, I'm so addicted to sugar. I have a patient yesterday who said, you know what, doc, I have 7 cans of soda, but after I met you last time, I switched to 7 cans of diet soda. Right? So, but the hardest thing about that statement was I said, good for you. I'm so glad that you were able to meet me somewhere. But the scary part about this is the information on messaging around diet sodas is so strong that basically people feel like they're doing themselves a service if they're taking diet sodas. And the thing is poor old water. Right? Water has been punished and beaten up so much. I mean, I go everywhere and I see people with smart waters. Thank goodness none of you have it, because I call it smart pee. That's all you literally do. Your kidneys are so remarkable that they get rid of this stuff. So what I want you to take from this study is, sometimes the simplest things make all the difference. Diet is not the answer to everything. It really depends on everything else, including sleep, exercise, love. And when you leave here, if you take anything away from me, is to start practicing gratitude. Even when you don't agree with somebody, practice a little gratitude. Be thankful for what you got. Say thank you more often. And with your colleagues, say hello. Everybody in this room, say hello to each other at work, because it makes a difference. It makes your lives fuller and richer. Listen, we're all going to die, The question is not about dying. We're all going to die. So the book, How Not to Die, I disagree with. We're all going to die. The truth of the matter is, how do we live? And that's what matters. So I want to thank you for your time. In terms of the bottom line, this is for you guys. That's my newborn, my lovely daughter. And that's my other daughter, who is 4.5. And you know, this is, I always say this at the end of my talks to everybody, is people ask me why I do this. And I say, at the end of the day, I want to know that I left something for my kids. That I tried to do something that was important. So when they look at their dad, they're proud of their dad. Because he truly tried to make a difference. Not try to do something that pleased people, but stood against the grain and said the right thing. So I do this because it's truly a passion of me. And that's why I do it. So with that, let me open it up. I know you're going to have a lot of questions. If you don't, I have questions that people ask me. I'll make sure I mention those to you. So if you guys can carry the stuff around. Thank you.
You brought up the red meat and the studies. Did they look at the quality of the red meats? So did they look at things like bison, which have similar nutrition profiles to something like chicken breast?
So it's very interesting that even though those studies are inclusive of things like bison, they did not segregate that. That's part one. Part two is that the only study that I know about was looking at things like what happened if you took animal products that were corn-fed versus that were grass-fed. And if I got products that were grass-fed, would that be better? So the difference is if you have animals that are grass-fed, they actually have a higher concentration of omega-3s. But the simple answer still remains the same, is not about exclusion. So this is not about, oh my God, I have to give up red meat and processed meat, but it is about limitation. Even bison, if you look at the places where they have the longest living people, they do not eat meat every single day. Meat is a celebratory thing. If you eat it once a week, twice a week, that is fine. The problem we have with meat is not about bison, it's not about grass-fed or corn-fed. It is not about being political and talking about what is the damage of the environment, because clearly there is, but that's not the purpose of this talk. The important part of this talk is that as you move away from even a little bit, even a single serving, and if that's all you're willing to do, it has a positive impact. And if you replace that with things like more fresh fruits, even a single serving, or whole grains, even a single serving, that makes the biggest impact. So the answer to that question is complicated, and that's where a lot of the controversy is. But my recommendation is still exactly the same. Here's a spectrum, you have to move down the spectrum.
Dr. Hashmi, thank you very much for your talk. I really appreciate that. I have two questions. Number one, what does the data show regarding farmed fish versus wild fish? And number two, what do you do when you do encounter a Kaiser employee who's imparting their own beliefs on somebody else? For example, I had a midwife I'm working with, and she told a pregnant lady, don't drink any milk because milk is just basically empty calories, and I think that's totally false. But what would you do in that case?
So part of this is you have to understand, this becomes really important because whenever we look at one single ingredient, even if we have people who have very strong beliefs, that one single ingredient change will not make or break anybody. This is incredibly important because you have to figure out there are people, like for example, sometimes when people ask me a question and I try to give an answer, what they do is they're not listening. I know what they're doing, they're just waiting to talk. And when you experience that, you know you're not going to be able to reach them because they have such strong beliefs. But what you have to understand is what about the other stuff? Where can we agree? When somebody talks to me and says, look, the paleo diet is the best diet, and the data clearly shows it's not, and they say, oh my God, you have to do the paleo diet. I say, you know what? I am so proud of the fact that you have decided to make this change to make your life better. I am so proud of the fact that you have decided to cut out processed foods out of your diet. How wonderful is that? So I figure out where's the positive in that conversation, and I try to connect. Because if I can connect with them, then I have a way to have an open and honest discussion. You see, most people eat so much bad stuff as it is that one of these single nutrients won't really make or break them. And their beliefs are so strong that if you come across as the same way, you say, you have to take my opinion because it is evidence-based, they won't take it. Part of the learning lesson that I've had, every time I give a talk, somebody comes up to me and they say, you know what, well, X and X study, one of the most famous stuff I always hear is, well, we looked at the Adventist Health Study, or 1 or 2, and we found this. I said, well, that's great. I read the Adventist Health Study. But the Adventist Health Study isn't the only study out there. And it does not prove de facto that basically going to a veganism lifestyle is the healthiest choice. Because for every study you bring up to me, I have hundreds of studies to counter. But where can we meet each other? This is really important as health educators, is you will invariably run into people who have different agreements than yours. Your job is not to convert. But your job is to figure out where can you meet them. Because at the end of the day, anybody who says, I have made the decision to go on a diet, and I picked the diet of Dr. Oz, God knows which one it is this one, but I did it. You know what? Celebrate it. Because now they are vulnerable to suggestion. They have finally put down their guard and they're willing to listen to you. And you can work with that. So highlight the positives first and work with them and see where you can meet them. Because if you come off and say, no, you know what, that Dr. Oz, because I have to be honest with you, when he put a couple of my patients in the ER, I was so mad. I would be like so quick to react. And this has been a journey for me to learn to not react. You know, when I started giving this talk, I remember the very first time I gave this talk, it was incredibly stressful. I mean, I had the craziest questions. I'm like, oh my God, and I wanted to put my hands on my side and go like this, like really? But you know, this is a growth for me. This is a journey for me to understand that I don't have to be right. We are in the care of health. And if I get somebody to take a few steps, I've more than done my job.
Thank you so much for talking with me. I'm curious, can you not hear me? The OptiFast product that we use, the partial meal replacement, so they just reformulated it so it has artificial sweeteners, right? So it has less sugar. And you're saying that artificial sweetener intake is linked to weight gain. And then I'm wondering if we're encouraging them to use this product, we're also sort of depriving them of having more whole grains and fruits and vegetables in lieu of it. Do you think we're doing a disservice by...
Great question. So this is a great question. So the question, if people didn't hear, is, you know, OptiFast recently changed their formulation. They're using artificial sweeteners. They're trying to move away from that. They also changed their formulation for their protein, by the way. They went from mostly whey to now 70-30, 30% being plant-based protein, 70% being whey protein. So the answer to this question is incredibly complex. So as you know, OptiFast is Nestle. And if you know anything about Nestle and you have kids at home, you know that there's another side to Nestle, right? And you know, in other countries, it's not called Nestle and it's not called OptiFast. They have different names for it. They have a huge science division. But the important thing about this is, when you're looking at people who are absolutely discouraged and who need to change, if they switch to something that's lower calories, even though the calories may not be the healthiest calories, and they start to move down the spectrum, do we have an ability to be able to now give them more quality and start to work with them and start to say, okay, great, once again, I'm going to meet you where you're at. Some people come to us and they're so incredibly discouraged. They come to us and they have gone through so many failures that they have a hard time accepting the idea, if I don't start to see results, I'm just going to clam up. And those are usually the people in your class who never say anything. They're very friendly, but they're so discouraged and they don't want to come out and say anything. So my response to that question is it a great product? No, I don't think so. Do we have an alternative? I'm looking, and I haven't found any. You know, we've looked at Robart, and it's the same problem as Nestle. So it's not like one product is better than the other. They both have their same issues. But in terms of meal replacements and everything, the real question is how do we drive this journey? How do we start to get to the point that it is okay if they're still having some stuff that's not optimal, but they're starting? So then we can talk about and have them have an open mind about things like, let's get you to walk a little bit, right? Let's start to get away from this crazy idea. I mean, to me, no knock to anybody in here who does CrossFit, but you know, CrossFit is like a cult. It's amazing, and I was a personal trainer and did this for a long time. I ran a boot camp company and blah, blah, blah. But what I found really interesting was that people jump into these things, but what they're really jumping into is the social network. They're looking to have people they can talk to, they can agree with, they can laugh with, they can joke with. That's why they come there. You know, that's the same thing with like going to church. People go there for the same reason. But what you want to do is to create our classes in the same format, that they're welcoming, that there's a safe spot. So I agree with you that it's not a great product, and I would love to find something. What I'm struggling with right now is how do we find that replacement? And we're doing work around it. We're looking at products. We would love to see that. You know, sugar is interesting. It lights up the same area of brain as cocaine does, which is interesting. Now, I've gone to a certain conference where it was very interesting because they said, we're not going to give you sugar, we're going to give you honey. Right? They were adamant that you can't touch sugar. Well, for the love of God, what does honey do in your blood? It has the same exact effect as sugar does. So I conveniently walked out to Starbucks and put some sugar in my coffee and came back. And then they were mad because I put milk in there. They're like, oh my God, you can't put milk in there. I said, I love almond milk, but they didn't have almond milk. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So it's really interesting, right? But for me, it's really about acceptance. And how do we move the culture? We are so far here where people are doing so many things that are bad that if we only changed a few things, we would be remarkable. I know it's not a direct answer, and I know it's not the answer you're looking for. You know, I've been watching some of the stuff on CNN and all these other channels, and I realized the guys, that when they're answering a question, the second you ask them a question, they talk about something completely different. Right? They never get to the answer. And it's like masterful deflection. And I don't know how they got so good, but you know, if anybody in this room is an expert, please teach me. Because I get into these situations where I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to say? No, but that's the answer. That's the true answer that I believe. Who's next? Oh, right here.
I'll just shout. So thank you very much for your discussion today. I completely agree about the Dairy Council, the Beef Council. It's very difficult to find reliable research to follow. And so during your research, did you see anything about dairy and inflammation by chance?
Yeah, so this is really interesting when we start to talk about things like dairy. In fact, what we saw, which was only a few studies, was actually the opposite. And it actually had to do with the bacteria inside your gut. So there's an emerging field of the gut microbiome, which is probably going to be huge. You know, it's one of those new things that's incredible. In fact, not to go off your topic, but one of the questions I always get asked is about probiotics. And the question is, should I be taking probiotics? Well, if you eat a healthy diet, you will get probiotics and they'll be healthy and they're good for you. But we do know that probiotics in conditions like IBD and several other conditions, there is an impact. So even in conditions like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, even in cases where you're trying to prevent things like pouchitis, and these patients have most of their colon resected, and you're left with an ileum where they convert it into a pouch. We know that taking probiotics makes a big difference. So low-fat dairy products actually help you to build this really nice gut flora in your body. The stuff that really does a number, which we know about the very elegant studies that are now being repeated, were things like when you had higher intakes of red meat and processed meat, and how the carnitine was converting into things like TMAO, and how that was causing a lot of inflammation. In fact, we also know that as you switch to eating lots of plants and vegetables and fruits, what ends up happening is things like people who have rheumatoid arthritis, in studies that are, once again, not randomized placebo-controlled studies, it actually shows that their symptoms are better. They're not cured. I know a lot of people out there say, here's a lupus diet that will cure you of your lupus. That is not true, but you actually do a whole lot better. So the answer to that is yes. And then the second part of that same rule applies to exercise. Low intensity exercise creates just enough inflammation in your body that a lot of researchers feel is just the ideal thing for you to actually be able to fight off things a lot better. High intensity exercise, on the other hand, actually is very interesting. Marathon runners, which I think is incredible, people who run marathon, is such an amazing accomplishment. But it's very interesting. There's a really nice study out that shows that marathon runners actually have episodes of acute kidney injury while they're running, because it puts a lot of strain from the muscle breakdown products. So the answer to your question is from the data that I've seen so far, it's actually the opposite. Now, anything taken to the extreme. Of course, if you are eating cheese all the time, then of course you're going to get into trouble from that. And that's the problem with some of the stuff we have. So if your version of low-fat dairy is getting a Big Mac, it's, you know what I mean? So that's where people kind of take it and they stretch some of the truth. But low-fat dairy in general, it is good for you.
Just had a question.
Thank you very much. This is, I think, the third or fourth time I've heard you speak.
Yes.
And I learn every time I hear you speak.
Oh, good, because I thought you'd be tired by
It's
now.
always something new. I was wondering what your thoughts are about, some people preach like glycemic
Yes.
diets or eating foods that have low glycemic index. Also about antioxidants.
Yes.
And in some of our classes, I'm not a dietitian, but I hear many of my dietitians debate healthy plate versus carb counting. Just what your thoughts are.
Great question. So let me make sure that I address all of them properly. So healthy plate versus carb counting was one, and what were the other two?
The glycemic index
Glycemic.
and antioxidants.
Okay, so let's start off with the glycemic index. So it's very interesting that, there was a lot of discussion, this is probably now going back about 15, 20 years ago. Glycemic index and glycemic load was all the rage. And this also happened to be around the time where, the Atkins diet was also gaining a lot of popularity. So the problem with the glycemic index and glycemic load goes fundamentally against the idea that we're trying to preach, which is we're trying to focus on a lifestyle. What we look for in our plate. Our plate is so elegantly designed that people don't realize because it's so simple. Everybody wants a really, really complicated solution. They really do. It's so funny is they want this diet that's so complicated that they know they're never going to follow. They want everything to be laid out. They want all the macros. They want to know how much protein, fat, carbs there is. But at the end of the day, they stick to it for like 3-4 days. This is a fascinating thing that happens. But when we give them something so simple, we say, look, take a look at your plate. 75% of your plate is what? It's vegetables, fruits, it's whole grains. 75% of your plate. And the 25% is protein. That's it. How simple can you get? And if you did that, you would not only be eating foods that would help you to improve your sugar load, that would help you to lose weight, that would also help you overall in terms of getting all your antioxidants. You know how you get antioxidants? Take foods with color. You know how you don't get antioxidants? Take a supplement. Because higher doses of supplements in antioxidant form do what? They kill you. You want the data? We have very elegant data that shows that when you're taking antioxidants as supplements, they're really bad for you. Vitamin E was all the rage. Vitamin D was all the rage. Now it's vitamin K is all the rage, K1. And now it's magnesium is all the rage. So some of the stuff I'm seeing now is everybody saying every single person on the planet is magnesium deficient, so go run and get magnesium. Well, that's great if you want to go to the bathroom, right? That's what milk of magnesia or mom is. It's magnesium. But the problem is that's not how you're supposed to be doing it. So in terms of that stuff, my argument to that is very simple, is the healthy plate is too simplistic that people think there must not be any science behind it. There's incredible amount of science behind the healthy plate. It wasn't just a random act of, we said, gosh, should you take 3/4? Well, you know what, Ray, where's Ray? I always pick on Ray. Ray's not here, but Ray would be like, I want 1/4. No, Sean, I want 2/3. No, we actually thought about this. This was a lot of research into it. So in terms of the antioxidants, I completely disagree with people that they have to figure out how they're not going to get enough by either following the healthy plate or anything. You want antioxidants? Pick color. That's it. Color, nature, that's how nature designs food and vegetables, with color to tell you they're rich. The darker the color, the more antioxidants you're getting, and they're better for you. If you're thinking about, I just need to go on low glycemic, listen, you're going to forget that. But you know what's easy to follow is when you're eating, you're like, oh gosh, I better make sure that I have some kind of non-starchy vegetables. Let me just make sure I put a salad. A darn salad is half my plate. And you know what's a really cool thing? If you eat it. If you just eat half the salad first and then eat whatever the heck you're going to eat after, it makes a difference. You got food in here. It makes you less hungry. Now, if you want to know how effective that is, look at one of the latest gimmicks that we have, which is a gastric balloon. We put a balloon in your stomach, we inflate it, trying to mimic what? Satiety. Well, why don't you create your own satiety, put some vegetables in there that are slowly digested? But call me crazy. I say kind of crazy things sometimes. So that was as far as that goes. So glycemic index, antioxidants, and your healthy plate issue in terms of carb counting. So the question is, really, when it comes to carb counting, is there a different diet for diabetics? And this is really interesting because if I show you some of the data on things like Mediterranean diet, and when we look at some of the studies on Mediterranean diet, and let's see, where is it? On this particular slide, one of the things that's very interesting, and this was of course Predimed, when we looked at Predimed in a sub-analysis, what we found was that people who stuck with a Mediterranean diet had a 40% drop in the incidence of type 2 diabetes. 40%. What was so unique about Predimed? Remember, this was a randomized control study. You want some of the greatest, most elegant studies, you want a randomized control study, and we had that data. So the answer to that question is, I don't believe there ought to be a completely different diabetic diet. That's not to say there isn't value in carb counting, there isn't value in talking about antioxidants. There is. There is. And for patients who need that, they need that. But Healthy Balance was designed to be an inclusive program, not to get lost in the details and become so exclusive that now you spend all your time talking to one member and you have excluded every single person in the class, only because your focus shifted. Is that?
Hello. Sorry. Thank you for your talk, as well as everyone else has said. Along with Healthy Balance, one of the primary programs that I teach in is diabetes, so kind of lending into that. Number one question that I get in diabetes classes is, how do I make this go away with diet? Or, there seems to be a lot of focus on diet and diabetes. And so for a patient who comes in and asks the question, if I just start eating right, and especially when it comes to carbs, and carbs seem to be the devil to them, and what would be kind of your response to?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So the first question, and I know people don't want to hear this, is it really depends on how much of your pancreas is left. So in other words, if you're a type 2 diabetic, every type 2 diabetic eventually becomes a type 1. If you burn out your pancreas, you need insulin. So if you're looking for that cure, it really depends on how far you're gone. That's number one. And I know that's not something people want to hear, but you have to understand that. So before you promise somebody and you say, look, if you follow our healthy plate model, we're going to cure you of your diabetes, the answer is no. It may happen, it may not. Same thing with bariatric surgery. When we do bariatric surgery on people and they have this remarkable recovery, it really has to go on people who still have their pancreas left. If I cut your arm, it's not going to grow back, no matter how much broccoli you eat. And this is a concept that's so hard, because what differentiates us from some of the fads out there, especially on the private practice arena where they're having these weight loss programs, is they make a lot of these claims. And if you want to sell a supplement, hey, cure your diabetes, right? 1 pound per day, right? How cool is that? I mean, I hear the craziest stuff, but the truth is it really depends on that. Number two that comes up very, very important when you look at people who have diabetes is, remember, diet is one component, right? So if you try to diet, and that's the only thing you do, you're going to mess up your resting metabolic rate and your body's going to fight against it. So what you have to focus on is a lifestyle. So it's really important. At CHL, we have 9 programs that we offer, and we're looking at the evidence behind all of them. But we have a sleep program. We have a diabetes education program. We have our Healthy Balance. So we have an opportunity for people to get the full spectrum. In Healthy Balance 2.0, which I feel is the most evidence-based program in the country today, because we spend so much time looking at the data. And I looked at the other programs, and I can't find anybody who has so much evidence that if they've gone through repeatedly to come up with their guidelines. But what we know when we talk about things like diabetes and everything else is if you focus on sleep, you focus on exercise, you focus on making sure they're doing the simple things as get some stress relief in their heart, and they understand that this is a lifestyle. What we're in it for is to help them live, not to let them lose weight and think they got better only to get sick of it. We want them to enjoy life. We want them to see their grandchildren grow up. We want them to be there when their kids get married. That's our goal. So we have to come from a perspective of the reason we do it this way is we're not looking for short-term fix that you will fail on 6 months later and come right back to us for another diet. We want to give you the tools so you have these tools to help you along the line. And we know that the evidence is very clear that the recommendations we're making does achieve at least 5% weight loss, which 5% weight loss could mean the difference between staving off diabetes and pushing it further down the line by 10, 20 years if you followed the self principle, which is so incredibly important. So I know it's hard because there's a lot of pressure on us, because patients come and they see something on TV and they want those results. But remember, those patients are also hurting inside. They haven't had somebody who showed them, 1, respect, and 2, who worked with them to finally make them realize, you know what, you can do this for the long run. We focus so much on the content, and we forget about our own body language. We come across as, you have to do this, you have to do this, or you know what? What Healthy Balance stands for is completely wrong, because I know that if you just cut out the carbs, you're going to do great. Well, that's not the way it works. In fact, if you cut out the carbs, if you've never done it, I suggest you try it. Try to do a keto diet and see how you feel. You will feel miserable for the first couple of weeks. But then, people on keto diet say, but you know, after the first couple of weeks, I felt great. Yes, but couldn't you do the same thing if you were just eating a moderate diet? So what about the guys who do a keto diet versus a paleo diet versus the plant-based diet? They all come up and say the exact same thing. I lost 10 pounds. I lost 3% body fat, and I gained 2 pounds of muscle. But the problem is I is 1. I showed you data today that was 500,000, 1 million plus people. 1 or 1 million. And that's where the difference lies. So it is an incredibly complex question with really no single answer.
You talked about, you brought up gluten and celiac and how practically everything is gluten-free. And if an individual, and this is just because my husband's not my aunt, my husband's family, but they get very like defensive, and they said, the doctor said, okay, yeah, it's not full-blown celiac, like a full-blown allergy, but gave this thing about thresholds and this and that and how far you have to go into an allergy, or can you be slightly, or all this stuff. And so she's cut out all the gluten and everything, and now she's got her daughters on it and all this stuff. And so I was sitting there having this debate, like you said, getting into things and which shouldn't have even happened, but yeah, there's this big thing. And so then I was looking into doing some research, and there are some things that say, yeah, you might not have full-blown celiac, but there's this threshold, and you can and it causes bloating, and so just scratch it out, and it's better for you.
You know, this is a really interesting point, because on gluten-free diets, if you're doing that, once again, the way I look at it is anybody who makes a conscious decision to change their life, we should celebrate. We have to get over this idea that my diet is more right than your diet. Because it's so amazing. I keep being asked on a regional level and a national level to go into these debates with people. And it just doesn't make any sense to me why we have to debate, because the people I'm debating with, honestly, they're not the ones I care about at all. They're not the ones I'm worried about. It's the people who are out there who have absolutely no knowledge, and they will follow somebody blindly because we weren't there to tell them. So what I ask them to do is to listen to our stuff. So look at the stuff that we're doing. We're going to start making presentation like today's available on our website, which is kp.org/healthybalance. We will eventually get around to taping it. I know somebody's taping it. We'd love to have a copy so we can put it online. But we want to put this information on our website. We want to make our website a hub. We want to have videos that talk about what is Healthy Balance. What does it stand for? We want to have not me talk about it. I want all of you guys on there. You see, I get so mad. One of the few things that really pisses me off is when I open up Washington Post, New York Times, and I see all these so-called gurus, and I don't see any of you. Why is that? Is it because somehow this room is less smart than anybody else out there? No. It's because of the same concept. Look, Ray Nanda, when he spoke to the board about the stuff that we were talking about, he presented data that said, look, Jenny McCarthy has 1 million followers on Twitter. Sean has like 4, which is his wife and his daughter, right? And it's really crazy. So who are you going to believe? You're not going to believe a guy like me. You're going to believe the person who's got all these Twitter, Instagram, Facebook followers. And so part of that is we need to figure out how do we start getting our message out there, and we need to be in the front. So when LA Times the next time is looking for an expert, we have, what, 70, 80 people in this room who are experts? Why do we have to go looking anywhere else? This baffles the mind to me. So my answer would be give us some time. We are building this foundation. Just to have all of you guys in this room united around Healthy Balance 2.0, it's incredible. You know, Healthy Balance 1.0 was so difficult to launch because we couldn't get consensus. We had to put a product out. And people said, you know what, you didn't ask us for our feedback. Well, nobody could agree on anything. But Healthy Balance 2.0, you know what the difference is? The difference was, I said, the one thing we're going to do is we're going to ask everybody for their feedback. You get a chance to speak about this at all sorts of events. That was my instructions, that was my message to all of my team, to make sure that we are inclusive and not exclusive. We were going to be evidence-based and take our bias out. We did that. We did that. We created a program that's not perfect. We created a program that's going to evolve, but we created such a better program because we listened to everybody in this room. We're no longer didactic. It's not about preaching. It's about interacting. It's not long. We cut it down. The sessions are not long. We cut down the sessions. We added exercise to it. We did all these things because we know it would make a difference at the end. So we're coming. Whether people like it or not, KP Healthy Balance 2.0 is coming. And we're going to make a stance, and we're going to show not just us in Kaiser, but us across the nation, that Healthy Balance 2.0 is the most scientifically based program in existence right now.